He is one of the most famous people on Earth, an Oscar-winning actor, a philanthropist, an environmental activist, a household name for over 2 decades. And yet, Leonardo DiCaprio doesn't seem to have aged in the way most people do. Not professionally, but professionally. While the world has continued spinning, while friends married, had children, built homes, and watched time leave marks on their faces and hearts, DiCaprio appears to have paused. At 32, there's no switch that flipped, no breaking point, just a quiet freeze. Somewhere between the aftermath of Titanic and the height of The Departed, he seems to have stopped evolving emotionally. And the strange part is, no one really questions it anymore, because this is a story that doesn't ask for attention. It just exists, like a photograph framed in time. A man surrounded by people who keep getting younger while he stays exactly the same. 1997 did not feel like just another year. It felt like something had shifted, in culture, in cinema, in the very architecture of fame. The world had entered a new kind of obsession, one no longer reserved for royalty or rock stars. That year, a film about a sinking ship changed the trajectory of modern celebrity. Titanic was more than a movie. It was a phenomenon, a sweeping operatic love story wrapped in historic tragedy, released into a decade hungry for spectacle and sincerity. And at the center of it all was a young man with a cigarette behind his ear, and a look in his eyes that made people feel like they already knew him. Leonardo DiCaprio didn't just play Jack Dawson. He became him. The film's success was unprecedented. Crowds lined around theaters. Teenagers returned 10, 12, 15 times. People cried at the ending, even though they knew how it would end. Over $2 billion at the box office. 11 Oscars. And a level of exposure so intense, so relentless, that it would alter DiCaprio's life forever. But not in the way people expected. Because something cracked underneath the surface of that success. Something hard to define. When the applause quieted and the award shows ended, Leonardo DiCaprio looked at what he had built and recoiled. He wasn't overwhelmed by fame, he was repelled by it. He skipped major award ceremonies, he refused interviews. He stopped appearing in public altogether for stretches of time. Not because he didn't appreciate what Titanic gave him, but because he saw what it could take away. It gave him adoration, yes, but it also gave him scrutiny, distortion, loss of control. A beautiful cage built from screaming fans and glossy magazine spreads. And he knew, once you become a symbol, it becomes harder to remain a person. So, he made a decision, quietly, and with more awareness than people gave him credit for. He decided to disappear, before the industry could turn him into a product. And what followed would define not just the next phase of his career, but the architecture of his emotional life. Because in escaping Jack Dawson, DiCaprio wasn't just walking away from a role. He was walking away from growing up in public. And maybe, from growing up at all. Disappearing from the spotlight wasn't an act of rebellion. It was a strategic retreat. After Titanic, most actors would have doubled down, cashed in on the moment, signed multi-million-dollar deals, maybe worn a tuxedo in 5 more romantic dramas. Hollywood loves a face that sells. And DiCaprio's face sold everything. Tickets, t-shirts, dreams. But he did something rare. He walked away from the easy version of himself. From 1998 to the early 2000s, his film choices became sharper, riskier, more aggressive. He starred in The Beach, a chaotic sun-drenched fever dream that questioned idealism and ego. Critics were confused. Audiences were polarized. But DiCaprio didn't flinch. He wasn't chasing approval anymore. He was chasing credibility. Then came Gangs of New York, and more importantly, Martin Scorsese. This was the moment where his image fractured, where the teen idol split away from the man he wanted to become. Scorsese offered him not just serious roles, but access to a different kind of masculinity, one rooted in moral ambiguity, spiritual unrest, and psychological violence. In The Aviator, DiCaprio unraveled as Howard Hughes, a man obsessed with perfection, devoured by the very control he tried to maintain. In The Departed, he played a cop so deep undercover that even his own identity became expendable. These weren't safe characters. They didn't end in triumph. They were complex, unstable, uncomfortable, and they worked. DiCaprio was no longer the boy who painted on the deck of a ship. He had become something else entirely. A vessel for flawed men with unreachable desires. The roles demanded more from him. More anger, more fear, more silence. Professionally, it was a transformation. But it came with a cost. one that wasn't visible in the press circuits or acceptance speeches. Because while the characters evolved, he didn't. Not inwardly, not relationally. The public saw the films get deeper, the acting more intense, the awards more prestigious. But behind that, behind the applause, DiCaprio had built something even more lasting than his career, a life insulated from permanence. Between 1999 and 2025, Leonardo DiCaprio dated more than a dozen women. None of them were older than 25, and that's not speculation. It's a timeline, documented, public, mapped out in articles and memes, so consistent it became a joke, so specific it became a pattern, so revealing it became a mirror. People asked, why does it matter? It matters because it tells us something about how he sees time, or perhaps how he refuses to see it. 25 is not just an age, it's a threshold, a point where innocence begins to fade, where responsibility creeps in, where life starts to ask you for answers. DiCaprio doesn't live there. He dates people who are by definition still becoming, and when they begin to settle into who they are, he moves on. It's not just about youth, it's about control. About keeping life light, flexible, untethered. No attachments, no expectations, no reality that can challenge the illusion of freedom. The world jokes about it, but the reality is sadder than it is funny. Because the man who's spent decades playing characters who collapse under the weight of their own power has quietly built a life where that weight never touches him. In The Wolf of Wall Street, DiCaprio plays a man who can buy anything, indulge everything, but never feel satisfied. In Revolutionary Road, he plays a husband crushed by the gravity of a life he never chose. In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he plays a fading star haunted by time, desperate to remain relevant. These are not random roles, they are reflections. DiCaprio is an actor of rare intuition. He doesn't pick easy scripts, he picks truths, even when those truths are about himself. His characters struggle with commitment, with maturity, with identity. They chase youth, they collapse under pressure, they run from responsibility. And in real life, he remains elusive. Private, quiet, detached. A man who speaks publicly about saving the planet, but flies on private jets and parties on billionaire yachts. A man who gives millions to climate change, but attends Jeff Bezos's $55 million wedding in a city that may not exist by the end of the century. The contradiction is not hypocrisy, it's duality. He is both. He lives in both worlds, and he's not alone. Leonardo DiCaprio is not an outlier, he is a symbol, a mirror of the world that built him. We live in a culture that glorifies youth, rewards detachment, and punishes vulnerability, where growing up is considered giving in, where permanence is weakness, where people are measured by their ability to stay relevant, not meaningful. DiCaprio didn't invent this culture. He just survived it better than anyone else. He found the loophole, the cheat code, the quiet path where no one can touch him. He is rich, respected, and alone, but only in the ways he chooses to be. He never got married. He never had children. He never surrendered to the roles that most of us take on by necessity. And maybe that's freedom. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a fear that no amount of talent can fix. A fear that if you stop running, time will catch you. That if you love someone enough to stay, you might finally have to become who you are, not who you used to be. There's something strange about seeing a 50-year-old man who still dresses like he did at 30. There's something haunting about a man who has everything, and yet seems to have built a life designed to avoid change. It's easy to envy him, to admire him, to joke about him. But maybe the truth is quieter. Maybe the truth is this. Leonardo DiCaprio is still 32. Not because he wants to be young, but because he doesn't know who he is outside of that age. At 32, he had everything: money, power, freedom, control. And instead of growing older, he chose to live inside that moment. Like Jack Dawson, frozen in ice. Like the Titanic itself, beautiful, massive, unstoppable, until it wasn't. This is not a story about Leonardo DiCaprio. It's a story about time, about what we do with it, about how we measure growth and how easily we confuse motion with maturity. DiCaprio has lived a life few could imagine. He's used his power for good, he's acted with brilliance, he's navigated fame without self-destruction. But there's a quiet sadness that follows his story. Not because he failed, but because he never moved past the moment he succeeded. It leaves us with a question, not about Leo, but about ourselves. When the world gives you everything, would you still choose to grow? Or would you choose to stay where it's safe, forever? 32. If you found this video meaningful, Consider subscribing for more stories that look beneath the surface. Share this with someone who sees the world a little differently. And thank you for spending your time here.